Russia's backing for sanctions against Iran in exchange for Israeli concessions in the conflict with the Palestinians. That's believed to be the main goal of the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Moscow. Well, RT's Yekaterina Grachova has been following the talks and now joins us live from outside the Kremlin. Yekaterina, is the pressure for tougher sanctions against Iran expected to top the agenda today?
Indeed, we expect that Iran will be actually the focus of this visit of the Israeli Prime Minister to Moscow. Netanyahu is here to promote bilateral relations. That's the official story. Yet the real story is, will Russia support still another round of sanctions against Iran, the fourth one? And one should expect that Israeli Prime Minister will try to get Russia on Israel's side on the Iranian issue. The Islamic Republic has so far remained unrepentant when it came to its nuclear program, and just recently it claimed that it's now expanding its nuclear program. Several days ago, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad stated that the republic can now refine uranium at 20%, which is just a step from the 90% enrichment which is needed to produce a nuclear weapon. So what can we expect from Netanyahu's visit to Moscow? He may ask the Russian leadership to ban any weapons deals with Iran and not to provide any nuclear know-how to Tehran. Said differently, Netanyahu wants to convince Russia that Iran is not a reliable partner. So far, Russia has remained unconvinced. To this day, it wants more clear intentions that Iran only wants civilian nuclear power ability. And most importantly, Russia is against any form of military action against Iran. Russia remains committed to relying upon the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the most authoritative force. Moscow has repeatedly made it clear that it wants a diplomatic solution of the Iranian issue. However, voices of those supporting further sanctions against Iran are now getting louder and louder in Russia.
Iran is definitely a very important issue. Definitely, we are very much concerned about the recent developments there. And I believe, this is my personal opinion as a Russian politician, that Russia should be stronger in its approach towards Iran and should support at least economic sanctions, not military actions, but economic sanctions against Iran.
Now, Yekaterina, if Iran does emerge as a bargaining chip during the talks, what developments in the Middle East peace process do you think could follow?
Yes, and one should know, too, that Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Moscow, the timing of this visit is very special because Benyamin Netanyahu is on the heels of the Hamas visit to the Russian capital. Its political leader, Khaled Mashal, was in Moscow just a week ago for talks with the Russian Foreign Ministry. And shortly before that, Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas visited Sochi to talk to President Dmitri Medvedev. So the fact that all parties of the Middle East conflict chose Moscow only demonstrates that Moscow is becoming a major peace broker in the region, something of which the world is taking notice of. It's, if you will, a formal recognition of Moscow's central role behind the scenes in the quest for peace. And the fact that all three came on Russia's invitation shows that Moscow, too, is willing to engage all parties in the Middle East peace settlement. This is something which the U.S. has failed to do so far, and even despite its close and what some describe as even intimate relationship with Israel, it has been unable to persuade its Israeli ally to make any form of concessions. And as a result, the Palestinians refuse to return to negotiations because settlements in the Israeli-occupied Gaza Strip continue to be built and blockade hasn't been lifted from Gaza. For almost half a century now, world leaders have been trying to cut the Middle East deadlock. RT's Paula Sleer takes a look back at 50 years of troubled history.
The storyline hasn't changed much over decades. Israel and the Palestinians as far apart as ever, despite the hands-on involvement of American presidents from Carter to Obama. But for all the peace summits and roadmaps, none have got very far. which is why perhaps it's not the game that's at fault, but the players. Trying to solve the Middle East peace process is an attractive goal for any world power, which is why so many diplomats have walked through the doors of this American embassy. But it would seem that many American diplomats perhaps overestimated the willingness of Arab countries to make concessions to Israel, and for Israel in turn to implement a complete freeze on Jewish settlements on disputed lands. After the Soviet Union cut relations with Israel in 1967 following the Six-Day War, Washington was left to control the game as it desired.
Russia was too busy with domestic affairs and economic challenges to really perform an important role in negotiations here. And at the time, the United States felt as very powerful. After all, it won the Cold War, and it didn't want to share the glory of mediation and negotiation with other participants.
Hassan Khatib has spent most of his life campaigning for Palestinian-Israeli dialogue. He was a delegate to the Madrid conference in 1991, which the US and Soviet Union jointly sponsored to try to break the deadlock, and attended talks in Washington that year. He says the main reason for the lack of progress has been America's bias towards Israel, which he believes works both ways.
I believe that Israel is selective in its international relations. They insist on a solo American role in the peace process because they are comfortable with the American approach to the peace process, and they prevent others or discourage others, such as Russia, but also Europe, from taking part in international efforts. And they try to encourage their relations with these countries, like Russia, on other issues, such as the Iranian threat, because they believe that Russia can play a role in this regard.
That's precisely why many believe Israeli Prime Minister Benyamin Netanyahu is visiting Moscow. He's expected to ask the Russian leadership to ban any weapons deals with Iran and not to provide any nuclear know-how to Tehran. In turn, his promise would be Israeli participation in any Russian-sponsored Mid-East peace initiative.
We are trying to help to re-switch direct dialogue between the sides, because we believe that comprehensive, viable and just solution might be reached in the framework of direct talks. The sides in the conflict have to decide what are the terms of such an agreement.
Russia talks to Israel's foes, Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran, putting it in a unique position to act as go-between. But not everyone believes that that makes Moscow the ideal mediator.
Iran and its allies are committed to preventing a settlement with Israel, and Russia does not have the leverage on Iran to change that.
Moscow first proposed holding a Mid-East conference as far back as 2 years ago, involving all the parties to try to finally find peace. Paula Slier, RT, Jerusalem.
All right, RT's Yekaterina Grachova and Paula Slier there reporting on the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Moscow. Many